My guest Kim Brunner demonstrates design work for beginners, so stay tuned. We are so excited today to have Kimmy Brunner with us. She is an award-winning quilter. She has twice won Teacher of the Year, voted by her students, and she writes a column, Ask Kimmy, with Machine Quilting Unlimited, our partner magazine. Welcome, Kimmy.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks for having me.
You brought a beautiful quilt, and
Thank
I
you
can't
very
wait
much.
to hear about it. Do you want to tell us about that?
I do. This quilt was made after I saw the movie Avatar. I went to that movie, and the colors and everything that was going on the screen, I couldn't wait for the movie to be over so I could go home and start making
that was just breathtaking, wasn't it, for quilters?
It was a quilter's movie. I would love to know how many quilts came into being because of that movie. But I came home and started ripping through my stash right away. I hardly got in the front door and started ripping through my stash thinking, what can I make, what can I make? And this is the quilt that I came up with. When it came time to quilt it, I wanted to quilt it in a way that a confident beginner would be able to execute because I do specialize in quilting beginning quilters. And which leads me to the subject that I'd like to talk about today. I think that confident beginning quilters can accomplish a whole lot more when it comes to quilting than they think that they can. They think they need to know everything before they start doing a cool quilt, and really you don't have to know everything. I've been quilting for 14 years and I maybe know half of everything.
Well, they're so worried. You know, I think it's so much worry. So taking some of that worry out is really going to help so many.
And if you break it down into little baby steps and little training wheels, instead of trying to eat the whole elephant at once, eat it one bite at a time, and you can execute much cooler designs than you think that you can. This quilt, as you can see, has very simple design elements. There are straight lines, there are piano key borders, which is easy. You stitch it with a straight ruler. The diagonal lines, again, stitch with a straight ruler, filled in with very simple meandering using a cool thread, and that's the secret. You're doing a simple technique, but you're using a cool thread that makes it look like it has a lot more sizzle and pop than it would have otherwise.
It looks hard. I mean, it looks like an advanced.
But it's not. Everything is
it's
easy.
Wonderful.
It's straight lines using a template and circles using another template.
Terrific.
I stitched it pretty closely because I wanted the wool batting that I used to pop and to fill the larger elements so that it would look as if it had been trapuntoed, which is kind of a cheater's way of doing trapunto, but it's a whole lot easier than doing the cutaway. So again, there are straight lines, diagonal lines, a little bit of circle work, a little bit of filler work, and that's it. And there's a really cool filler in the interior of the quilt that, again, is just done with a straight template. So if you are a confident beginner who feels comfortable with using templates on your machine, there's no reason why you can't do a quilt like this.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting.
Now let's talk about the quilt that I brought today, which is a quilt that is in process. I was working on it on my machine, took it off the machine, basting it first so that my layers wouldn't shift because I don't want puckers when I put it back on the machine. When I get home, I'll reload it and I'll keep working on it and complete my design work.
And isn't that nice that we can take something off?
Yes.
Because sometimes we need to do something else.
Sometimes you have tension problems and you just don't want to work out your tension problems on a quilt. You'd rather work it out on a scrap quilt, so you just take it off, put it back on. Sometimes you just get sick and tired of working on that quilt. You've hit a block, you don't know what you're going to do. That quilt needs to go away for a little while you work on something else. In this quilt, when I was looking at how I wanted to design it, the thing that stuck out to me the most were these circles in the center and in the corners. They stopped when they came to the edge of the quilt, and I wanted them to continue and finish in the border. So I used those circles as the bones of my quilting design, and I just grabbed a little Chalkoliner chalk marker because it goes on easy and it brushes off really easily. And I just chalked out my circles and started working from that skeleton, that basic bones of the design. I liked this curved cross hatching, and I wanted to kind of morph it out to make it look as if this circle had pushed out into this cross-hatched border and stretched it as it went.
It does look like that. I love it.
It looks kind of almost op-arty. And I thought that it really complemented the design work in the quilt, which is made with these gorgeous batik fabrics from Sew Batik, which I love because they're not stiff, they're not cardboardy, they're just wonderful drapable batik
I've used those
fabrics.
too. I love them.
They have great products. And I wanted my design work to obviously complement the fabrics and the design of the quilt itself. So I just plopped down some circle templates, chalked around them, worked from there, chalking in designs. When I liked them, I kept them. When I didn't like them, I brushed them away and started all over again. When I had something that I liked chalked out, it was time to start working. This is quilted, obviously, with a pink thread to complement my pink fabrics.
That's beautiful too.
And
that's your thread here?
It's a YLI variegated machine quilting thread in Maui Sunset. It matches my pink fabrics perfectly. This design work out here in the outer part of the border is going to be done with that same thread in Mediterranean, which matches my blue fabrics perfectly.
They're so subtle, variegated, but they just pop, don't
Yes, they really do. And I left a lot of open spaces because I want this beautiful black hand-dyed batik to really shine through. I don't want to cover it all up. I want to play with it, let it pop out, let it kind of play peekaboo with the viewer when the
So you
quilt
think
is
it's
done.
okay that we don't have to quilt something to death, right?
Well, I always like to quilt to death. And when I go back home and put this on the machine, this will all be quilted to death. It'll all be quilted to death. If God didn't want us to be quilting, he wouldn't have given us these great big rolls of thread. So it will be quilted to death when we're done.
Will we see this in a show?
No, I don't think so. I don't quilt for shows anymore because I found that I was winning ribbons and I didn't care about the ribbons. I was making quilts for judges and I wasn't making quilts for me anymore. I lost the joy of quilting, and so I stopped quilting for show and went back to quilting for me. So this is just for me.
Well, I hope to see it sometime because it sounds wonderful.
Thank you. I'm having a lot of fun working on it.
So now you're going to actually sew for us and show us how to do all this.
I will.
Okay. Well, I see that you brought lots of tools to show us how to do this.
I did. I love using tools when designing my plans for borders, or for blocks for that matter. And I don't use a lot of math because I'm not very good at math. I prefer the plop and chalk method of border design or block design. It just makes it so much easier. What I do is I just plop down my templates, chalk around them, and fudge everything to fit rather than figuring out mathematically this must be 5 1/4 inches from here and that must be 6 3/8 inches from there. It's easier to just plop and chalk.
Use your eyes and okay.
And we're better, I think when we're quilters, we are much better at judging how things fit than we give ourselves credit for. We're very good at seeing what is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that translates right over to our quilting designs. You can see if something is balanced. You don't need to measure it, your eyes will tell you. Just give your eyes credit for having the knowledge that they have. In this case, I just plopped my template down to fill my corner. I moved it out as far as I wanted it to be so that my corner would be full. I knew that I was going to want to come back in and do this pebbling work with this pinkish purple thread, and so I left plenty of room to do that. Did the same thing in the other corner, and I thought, you know, I like that look, that was good, so I kept it. Then I wanted a double spine, so I just moved my template in until it gave me the double spine spacing that I wanted to have. Then I moved my template to the center of my border. I figured out how much room I wanted between my spine line and the edge of my space to be filled, because I knew I'd want to come back later and do these little piano key stitchings. And I wanted to leave enough room so that it wouldn't look like little dwarf piano keys. And once again, once I had a spacing that I liked, I just chalked around it, moved the template over here to go over and give me a nice curving line, and just fudged it to fit. Once I had something that looked the way that I wanted it to look, I used a very thin mechanical chalk pencil. See how thin that line is? It gives me just a nice thin little line that I can easily follow. A thick line tells you a thick line tells you approximately where to stitch. A thin line tells you exactly where to stitch. I want to know exactly where to stitch because I want this border to turn out. Once I had chalked in my spine line, I went back in, chalked in my piano key lines, and again, no math, I just fudged them. I knew I wanted them to be about 1/2 inch apart and 1/4 inch apart, but some of them are a little more and a little less to make them fill this space. No math, just plop and chalk. And once I come back out here, this is just going to be freehand pebbling. There's no marking involved. I'm just going to drop my stitch, hit the gas, and go. When it came time to do this double spine line, I grabbed my little seam gauge that you would use if you were doing regular sewing. I set it to 1/4 inch, and I laid it down on my previously chalked line, chalked a little tick mark, moved my seam gauge over, chalked a tick mark, and just continued all the way through so that I would have a perfectly spaced 1/4 inch double line to follow.
Yeah, very important.
No fudging as I went along, because then you can wobble a little bit and those wobbles will show. So I wanted to chalk it first, then all I have to do is stitch on the line, and that's easy.
Cool.
So let me show you how to stitch it out.
Oh, good.
Perfect. Just going to start by bringing up that bobbin thread. Do a quick couple of little stitches for start and stop. I'm going to bring my template over. I've chalked my lines in, so now all I have to do is follow those chalked lines. But I want to place my template 1/4 of an inch away from my chalked line so that I can stitch right on my chalked line with no bobbles and no wobbles, because the template is going to hold my machine steady while I stitch that curve.
And you have the extended base underneath so that...
Yep, so it's like a little tabletop as I move along. So I'm just going to place my template. I'm just going to stitch right along that chalked line, stopping when I need to stop. Come out to the point, shift my template, stitch right back down again.
Nice and smooth.
Very smooth. Stop at that little point, shift my template, and I'm just going to follow along all the way to the other end, doing exactly the same thing that I've been doing. Okay, as you can see, I've just finished quilting that line. It was easy as could be. I just stitched along until I needed to move my template, stop the machine, move the template, resume stitching.
And it's beautifully smooth. Yeah, very
That's
nice.
what templates do for you. It gives you a nice, smooth stitching line. You just stay on your chalked line using this kind of as training wheels, a set of training wheels.
Okay, and so now you just stitch the next line inside of that one. Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
So we changed thread. I can't wait to see how you do the piano keys.
Let me show you how to do these piano keys without having to do any stitch in the ditch to travel from key to key. Because that's something that can often overwhelm a beginning quilter. The thought of having to precisely stitch over their stitch in the ditch and the fear of making a mistake and having to rip. Sometimes that fear will keep a beginning quilter from even trying this in the first place. And I'm going to show you how to do piano keys with no stitching in the ditch.
Okay.
And what I'm going to use is this very small template from Linda's Electric Quilters. It's a little tiny circle that gives me just enough of a curve to pop from piano key to piano key. I'm going to lay it down, and I'm just going to echo that nice little curve, travel from that key to this key, and stop. Bring in my straight line ruler, because I can't stitch a straight line without a straight line ruler. Travel out, stop, just do a little tiny bump, 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 travel back, shift my ruler, stitch out, little tiny bump over, and stitch back. Bring back my little tiny circle, bump right over, stitch out.
And just patiently continue on, huh? Okay.
All the way through.
And you skip the corner, so you're going to come back and do that.
I will come back and do the corner in one fell swoop. But this little bump over technique allows me to travel from key to key and never have to stitch in the ditch once. And boy, what a lifesaver that is. Now let me show you how I do this corner.
Okay.
We're just going to travel out and back in one fell swoop. Easy peasy pie. We're simply using that little tiny circle and a straight ruler. I'm going to bump out. And let me back up a little bit. Before I started stitching, I chalked a miter line and I chalked in where I want those straight lines to be, because you have to fudge them a little bit to make them fit the space. And rather than fudging as I quilt and maybe making a mistake and having to rip it all out, I'd rather chalk it, because then if it's wrong, I just rub away the chalk it back in again, make sure that it's right. And then when I start stitching, I'm good to go. I know everything lines up.
Terrific.
So I'm just going to bump out, grab my straight ruler, and once again, stitch out, bump over, stitch back, grab that little circle, stitch out, bump, back.
That really looks nice.
Stitch a half a circle, and a half a circle. I'm just going to work my way back again, doing the same thing I just did, only backwards.
So now you've changed thread for this outer pebbling.
I'm going to pebble the rest of the border to finish this blank space.
Okay.
And the reason that I'm using a slightly pinky purple thread is because when I got done piecing it, I was not really happy with the tone of the purple that I was using. I felt like it was kind of a dead purple. It needed to be brightened up to go with the orange and the bright blue and all the thread play that I wanted to do in the blocks. So I used my thread color to dramatically alter the look of the fabric used in the quilt.
Okay.
I turned a plain dull purple border into a bright purple border just by using brightly colored threads and by choosing them carefully. The thing that you need to remember is you don't want to get a little bit too carried away with all your thread work, because then it just looks like you threw everything but the kitchen sink on it. But you can make some very dramatic changes.
I love dramatic changes.
Yes,
You know me.
they're good for a person, aren't they? And to do this pebbling, it's super simple. Just start your stitching off the edge of the quilt. You're doing little tiny circles, so you want to keep your speed down. If you start going too fast, you're going to have railroad tracks on the back, and that means your tension is not good.
Okay.
And you want to throw in little pebbles, big pebbles, and medium-sized pebbles so that it looks very interesting. You want it to look like a rocky beach when you're done.
Okay.
So you throw in little bitty pebbles and great big ones. And you just go around. There's a great big pebble. Now I'm going to fill in with little tiny ones. You don't have to be too precise because there's so much going on in here. Nobody's going to see if you wobble your backtrack a little bit. And nobody's going to see if you miss a space. So it's kind of a foolproof method of filler quilting.
So it's okay to go around one more than once?
Oh yeah.
Terrific.
You just travel around as many times as you need to get yourself where you need to be. And you can throw in oblong ones, great big round ones, whatever you want.
Well, that does look like a rocky beach.
It does, and it gives a very cool texture, doesn't it?
Yes, that's beautiful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for showing us all these
Thank
neat
you.
techniques and the tools that you use. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.